The election was intense because Lula won the first round with 57.2 million votes, and Bolsonaro had 51 million votes. And then Bolsonaro had to basically win over 6.2 million votes in order to make it in the second round. So we just had that second round, and Lula won by a hair. He basically won by 2 million votes in the end.
Wow. In a very big country
In a very big country. Yeah.
with a
So
lot
it
of
was a
votes.
very small margin.
Now, why did Lula win? Why was he able to win? And why was it so close?
It was very close because Bolsonaro was able to flip votes in the second round. So, mind you, the first round happened in the beginning of October, and the second round happened in the end of October. So, during those 3 weeks, he had to flip over those 6.2 million votes and get people on his side. And he was able to do that. So, it was pretty impressive that he closed that margin. As I said, there was a huge difference in the beginning, and Lula was pulling ahead. And Lula was pulling ahead because I think there's a lot of reasons that Bolsonaro is sort of not well seen in the country. There's an increase in poverty in Brazil. Famine is back. There's a lot of issues. I think also the pandemic, mounting economic issues, all of that sort of contributed to people kind of wanting Lula to come back. But Lula is somebody who's controversial. And the reason he's controversial is because during his terms in office, he served 2 terms, one in 2002 and then one in 2012. Um, During his time in office, he actually let a lot of corruption happen in the country, and he was actually imprisoned for that. But then Brazilian politics are very complicated. I want to just say as a little just so you know that it's not easy. But yeah, so Lula is an ex-con basically. He went to jail. He was jailed for this. The person who basically put him in jail sort of conspired with the judge. There was a lot of dirty business surrounding the accusations. So it's not it in the end it became clear that he was kind of, I don't want to say the word framed, but it was pinned on him that he was more corrupt than he let on. Although I will say that during his rule, a lot of corruption did happen in general in the country. So I think that it was a difficult time for Brazil, and I think people remember him as the leader that let a lot of corruption slide. With that being said, Bolsonaro's platform was that he was going to end corruption in Brazil, and he did not do that. He did not succeed. In fact, he was actually accused of corruption himself. So it's, as I said, it's complicated, but at the end of the day, you have two polar opposites, and you had Bolsonaro at the end of that last stretch trying to get those votes away from Lula. And there was a lot of use of public funds and pulling every dirty trick in the book to sort of win those votes. So I will say that while it was impressive that he managed to, close that gap of difference between him and Lula, he still lost. So despite pulling every dirty trick in the book, despite using a lot of public funds to try and win the election, he ultimately lost. So I think that's what was most impressive to people, is that the force that Lula has is superior, and he was able to pull through in the end.
And so what kind of public funds or dirty tricks did Bolsonaro engage in?
Well, here's a good one. So right before the second round, he started distributing government handouts to the
Oh,
population
right.
to win support. So that was pretty bad because he was saying it's basically like he's buying votes,
Yeah.
right? Um, and there was a lot of fake news that was coming out. There was a lot of crazy stuff happening. But I think what really did not help him is that one of his supporters, who's this woman called Carla Zambelli, She's a congresswoman, and she's one of his biggest allies in Congress. She pulled out a weapon at someone on the street. This was a couple days before the election. And Bolsonaro has always been somebody who's supported guns. He's a big fan of Donald Trump. Everybody knows that some people call him the tropical Trump.
Mm.
And he has always talked a lot about how he thinks Brazilians should have the same kind of gun culture that people have in the US, and that every Brazilian should be able to carry a weapon. So I actually think that this congresswoman pulling the gun out 2 days before the election hurt him because it was an act of like sheer chaos. She just was insulted, felt insulted by somebody on the street. It's not clear what this person said to her. But when this happened, she pulled out a gun at this guy on the street, which is wild.
É a Zambelli, é a Zambelli. É a Zambelli, é a Zambelli. Calma aí, ó. Cara da Zambelli aqui, ó. Calma aí. Passa, vagabundo! Cara da Zambelli armado aqui, galera. Cara da Zambelli armado aqui, ó. Cara da Zambelli armado aqui, galera. É a Zambelli, é a Zambelli. É a Zambelli, é a Zambelli.
What do they keep saying? Azambelli?
Ameaçando a pessoa aqui, ó, com a arma.
Zambelli's her name.
Oh, okay. So they kept saying her name.
Yeah, they were like, it's Zambelli, because that's her surname. So she just pulled out a gun on that guy in the street. So yeah, I guess that's just an example of how chaotic it got towards the end there. But you know, I think it's pretty impressive that if you take into consideration that he spread a lot of fake news, that he used public funds and funneled them into the campaign, it was shocking that even with all that, he still lost, even though it was for like a really small margin, only those 2 million votes. He ultimately lost the election and was not able to pull through in the end. So people were really, and Lula said that in his speech when he accepted the win. He said he accused Bolsonaro of, using public funds to sort of in his election, and so he said, despite all that, they tried, and he even used this term. He said they tried to bury me alive, and I think he was referring to the fact that they pinned him for corruption. They put him in jail. They did all this stuff to sort of get him out of the political sphere, and yet he still survived. He still came out. He was released and absolved of the crimes, and then he ran for president and won.